This story began when I was driving my old car. In an attempt to save time, I decided to take a shortcut through the woods along the old railroad tracks. It was late, but I was determined to make it home after a long drive. The hundreds of trees along the road created ominous shadows, and the month was hiding behind the clouds, illuminating only part of the way. As I approached the railroad tracks, I noticed my car's headlight light reflecting off something on the tracks. Pulling over, I stared into the darkness. At first, I thought it might have been a reflection of metal structures, but when I got out of the car, my heart sank into my heels. A broken toy doll lay on the tracks, her clothes stained with dirt. I moved closer to get a closer look at it, and in the darkness I noticed that the doll seemed old and worn, covered in cracks and dust. It looked like something out of a horrible dream. I shuddered, jerking backward. My anxiety only increased when I heard the sound of a rumbling train in the distance. A strange fear seized me. I remembered the old legend of the stray train that roamed these tracks in search of those who dared to disturb its solitude. They were just silly, scary stories, but at that moment they came alive in my imagination. I got back into the car and decided to continue on my way. But as I started the engine, my gaze fell on the rearview mirror. There, in the reflection, I saw something dark and misty moving among the trees in the distance. I turned over, but saw nothing. Now, in deep anxiety, I started moving faster. But the farther I drove, the more my headlights seemed to illuminate only darkness. My cell phone had lost signal, and I had no choice but to continue forward. Finally, I saw the headlight ahead, a train. It was approaching from the side. I tried to speed up to cross the tracks before he arrived, but suddenly, before my eyes, a figure emerged out of the darkness. It was a man in old rags, with long hair tangled in knots. It was standing right in the middle of the road. I braked, my heart pounding. The man began to slowly approach my car. I shouted for him to leave, but he did not respond. That's when I heard the train siren again, sounding ever closer. Without further thought, I tried to drive around this strange man, but as my car passed by, I felt him touch my window glass. I flinched, speeding up, and at the last moment I crossed the tracks in front of the approaching train. When I looked over my shoulder, the strange figure was gone. I kept driving, never once looking back. My hands were shaking when I finally reached my house. That night changed me. I would never again dare to take shortcuts through dark and desolate places. When I finally reached my house, my heart was still pounding in my chest with tension and fear. When I finally reached my house, my heart was still racing in my chest from the tension and fear. In my room, I turned on the lights and sat on the couch, trying to regain my breath and calm down. Everything that had happened felt like a nightmare. I pulled out my phone to call someone, just to hear someone's voice and feel safe. The doorbell didn't answer. Moments later, I heard a knock on the door. My heart dropped as I jumped up to check who could be behind that door. "Who's there?" I shouted through the door, but there was no answer, just silence. I resolutely opened the door, preparing myself for anything. Standing on the threshold was my neighbor, good old Hank. He smiled, seeing my exhausted face. "Everything okay, son?" he asked, and I felt the tension begin to leave my body. "Yeah, it's okay, Hank. Just a long drive and strange encounters," I replied, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. Hank nodded, smiling. "I understand. Dark nights can be mysterious. If you need help or someone to talk to, don't be shy." "My house is right across the street," he said, pointing to his house across the street. I thanked him and went back inside my apartment. Through the window, I watched Hank walk down the street. He looked calm and relaxed. As I sat down on the couch again, I began to make sense of everything that had happened. Maybe it was all just feigned fear, but that strange man on the railroad tracks and his touch, I couldn't explain it to myself. Since then, I've avoided late-night trips to dark places. In my story for friends and acquaintances, I talk about a chance encounter with a weirdo on the road to explain my anxiety. But at night, when everyone is asleep, I still sometimes hear the sound of the train and see a shadow on the road, reminding me of that scary night when my terror collided with reality.